Welcome to episode 65 of the Creative Train podcast. This one is called You Know It's Working When, and this one is for the educators out there, not exclusively, but especially. How do you know when your message is being heard? How do you know when you're really connecting with your students and they're really listening and paying attention? How can you tell if your methods are making a difference? In my case, just last week, I had a wonderful confirmation of all of those points in two separate instances with two very different music students. I'll tell you all about it if you log into the podcast provider of your choice, or you can listen at creativetrain.ca. Just scroll down to the bottom of the webpage for the listing. All aboard. The topic of teaching, educating, whatever you want to call it, is something I am super passionate about. I've spent the majority of my adult life teaching music to students of all ages and all abilities and a whole bunch of different instruments. And I've been doing it for more than 30 years now, so it's pretty clear that I love what I do. I really appreciate the freedom to be able to develop my own teaching methods, my own means of interface with students. And I don't mean interface in the personal versus virtual sense, but in the sense that each person requires something very different from me. Some prefer a more formal atmosphere when they feel like they're being spoken to rather than conversing with me. And some prefer a much lighter approach of conversation intermixed with the lesson material. And regardless of whatever my student's age is, I always make a very honest effort to get to know them as people, not just clients, so that I can be a more effective teacher. And I've had criticism about my teaching methods in the past that I'm too friendly. I'm friendly with people that are friendly back, but otherwise I'll keep it strictly formal and, non-conversational with those people that aren't into that. I've touched on this topic a lot over the last 65 episodes, but check out two in particular for a different explanation of this. In the episode called Creative Teaching, I look at ways and means that teachers can use to explain the same thing many different ways to many different students. In another one called The Great Pivot in Modern Arts Education, I look at how we as teachers can start to adopt some of the online tools and apps that are actually really common for, let's say, kids to use, and learn to bring them into our own lesson flow. Here and now, I just want to tell you some really heartwarming stories about two of my students who quietly showed me that they were listening, practicing, and assimilating the things that I said and that we discussed. Any teacher will be able to tell you stories about students they get along with particularly well. Not a teacher's pet kind of thing, but someone who you just seem to vibe with, regardless of their age. On an energetic level, the vibe is there. This one young lady, I believe she's 12 now, has been a student of mine for 5 years. And I've seen her go from absolute beginner to developing an incredible ability to read music, to performance, and now finally into songwriting at 12 years old. She actually completed 3 levels of a certain guitar course in a September through June teaching season, we'll call it. Some people take a break for the summer. For most beginners, completing these 3 books could take up to 2 full years of mildly dedicated practice, and she tore through all 3 books in a fraction of that and did it really, really well. We get along well, we have our serious moments of concentration and questions and answers, and moments of just totally enjoying playing music together, as if we were lifelong friends. And no, it's not creepy, it's just there's a wonderful camaraderie amongst creative people. If you get it, you get it. If you don't, you don't. So there. So we were talking last week about dynamics in music, which refers to the volume, the expression, sometimes the pace, but it's beyond just the notes of the melody or the chord patterns. And just as I was about to offer one of my apparently famous descriptive analogs, she burst out with, Oh, yes. It's just like with cooking, where you want to blend the spices and textures and have the presentation just right, complete with hand gestures and vocalizations. I looked at her and I smiled and I said, yeah, I believe you've got that right. And she laughed. And she said, I knew you were going to say something about food because you always do when you describe playing music. And it wasn't so much that she remembered me talking about food, but she had my cadence, my tone, and actually used some of my own words, my own descriptive phrases right back at me. It was pretty cool. I knew my approach with her was working. She didn't tune me out when I interjected. She listened. She didn't reject my ideas. She put them to use. And it's not like I will ever claim to have all the answers, but I do have some perspectives that beginners don't have yet. And instead of pushing them away as some old guy rambling on about something, she had those moments of food and cooking analogies filed away somewhere neatly in her mind, and she brought them to the fore at exactly the right moment. I hope these things really stick with her, because there's a lot of times in life when certain problems or issues can be overcome or solved with a creative or intuitive approach to the issue. The more tools we have to access, the more often we use them and then have them proven in action, the more able we can all be. Who knows? 20 years from now, she might be faced with a situation where this idea about dynamics and contrast and balance in music might come back in her mind when she looks at a totally different issue and thinks of it as trying to fix a dish that needs correction. The other recent example of this is with another music student, a guitar player who will soon become the envy of his peers. Not that that should or is his goal or my intention with him, but he is in what you would call beast mode. He just needs some guidance and encouragement to commit to some technical study and theoretical study. He's been with me for a few years now. I actually taught him when he was like 6, and then for some reason, he stopped for quite a while, and he came back just 2 years ago. As every single 14-year-old male with an electric guitar in his hands eventually does, they come to the point of compromising accuracy over speed. They prioritize learning riffs over songs, learning the what to do, but never really getting down to the why. And although it's totally expected, and it is a rite of passage for most guitarists to do this as they advance, many folks don't have the opportunity for proper instruction to help form or guide this fire. So when I find myself charged with the musical evolution of such a gifted young player, I get hyper vigilant in how I work with them. And it's not that I do this by trying to diffuse his fervor or throw water on his fire, but I'll use a phrase with him that always brings him back to some very basics about music. He'll play something super fast, not exactly cleanly or particularly accurately, and I will say to him, "That was great. Now do it again." And he'll give me that deer in the headlights look, which tells me he could do the thing again, but he didn't really know what he was doing, so he could get close to doing what he did again. And I explained to him that, all the guitar heroes he has, when they record in studios, they don't just go in and do their solo once and it's done. When you hear, especially bands like Avenged Sevenfold, you go back into, earlier metal with Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, you hear dual guitar solos, harmonized guitar solos, where these guys don't have options of making stuff up in the middle of a solo. They learned it and they mastered it and then they recorded it over and over again to get it right. So I let him know that, and that came a bit as a surprise to him. Over this past year in particular, I've been really focused on getting his fiery fingers tamed and getting him to actually understand not only how to play more accurately, but also understand the musicality of it. Like slowing down a little bit. In other words, he can communicate his ideas in a real-world musical terms with other musicians. Somebody asks him that plays piano, what chord are you playing? You don't want to say the one on fret 7, right? You want to tell them what it is. What is the name of it? What are the notes in the chord? Why are those notes there? Why are they important? So I'll watch and listen to the things he comes up with. I'll know the key and the patterns and hopefully some outside reference for him to check out. But once I know what and how he's playing something, I'll take him back through the scale or scales, referring to the note names rather than the fret numbers that he was playing, and talking about the importance of proper technique by getting him to slow down and deliberately be able to duplicate what he played over and over again. So his ideas don't become a wash, a barely understood rambling of finger movements. It does happen all the time, especially with guitar players, because guitar is a very visual instrument to learn. We have to be able to watch somebody do something and play it back without actually knowing what went on in the real musical context. I learned how to play that way. I didn't really take lessons. I did when I was 9 years old. But after that, it was watching what people were doing and trying to copy it. So he's really come around to this level of understanding. And it's kind of a tough love kind of approach. I'm always encouraging, always challenging him, pressing him for more, and congratulating him whenever he accomplishes even the tiniest of things. I think the thing that really solidified this was one session we had. I recorded him into my computer workstation that I have in my studio so he could hear exactly how he sounded. He rehearsed the thing that he was going to play, which is a piece of his own, for, it was about 90 seconds long. He played it a bunch of times, and when he was ready, I plugged his guitar into the computer interface, and he did the thing. When he was done, I put it back to the beginning, and I said, cool, now play along with it. Do your part again, do the same thing. Again, deer in the headlights. He knew he couldn't do it. He tried, but he had to admit that he wasn't really focused on creating a functional piece of music more than just kind of finger wiggling in an approximate zone with roughly the same notes repeated at roughly the same time. So we had a good laugh about it, really, we did. And I said, okay, let this be maybe the last time that happens. And I said, you know what I'm talking about by being able to know your stuff? If you don't know your stuff, how can you ever explain it to a bandmate or a peer? And over the next few weeks, he worked really diligently at learning the scale he was using, the chords associated with it, and even some of the classical technique for the left hand that I was showing him. And you know what? He can play that thing like a pro now, right in sync with the recording, and can even describe the harmonies and possible chord accompaniments that might be chosen. And I always tell guys like this, my most embarrassing story as a musician, so that they know they're not alone, that I'm not speaking from some faultless platitude. When we learn to do something, it doesn't mean that we actually know what we're doing. We learn how, but not necessarily what. And it's a harsh reality. I think I was maybe 16 or 17 years old. I had learned a lot by watching and listening. I could wiggle my fingers pretty good. I felt I was ready for the big time, LOL. I had a chance to sit in on a jam with some folks that were much older than me. They had invited me because they heard me play in another context and thought about bringing me into their band. And I was like, whoa, this is my big break. Sadly, no. There were a few blues standards that they wanted to get warmed up with, and I had no friggin' clue what was going on. I was playing bass, desperately watching the guitar player for a cue that I could use to keep up, but that didn't even work for me because I didn't work hard enough at guitar to really know what I was looking at anyways. It started going from bad to worse, and eventually we came to understand the jam just wasn't going to progress, and I went home. The way I describe this moment to my students is that because people will assume that you play well, that you also understand well. And I've played with many folks who cannot grasp how to change the key of a song, how to follow a different rhythm or groove, or they don't know what a chord inversion is. And this really should be pretty common knowledge for someone who's been playing for a few decades. And at some point, we have to draw a reasonable line about whom and with and what, in which context we will play in a musical context with others. It's not to be elitist, but to just simply understand where your energies and abilities are not going to be simpatico, and you'll just end up being frustrated the whole time. So I said to my student with a big smile on my face, don't be that guy. Don't be like I was. Before these situations come up, let's address it so you know what you're doing. And he was game. He applied himself. And like the other student I mentioned, came back at me with some of my own words upon discovering something unique. He said he was having trouble committing something to memory until he reminded himself to, quote, stop thinking about the fret numbers and start thinking about the note names, end quote. That's something I roll out a few times a week. And he said that as soon as he started doing that, he found himself reciting the names of the notes of a scale we'd been working on, and it all started to make sense for him. It was like that moment in the Matrix movie where Neo could suddenly see through the code of the Matrix around him, and it all began to make sense to him. Now, those are two kind of long-winded stories, but they both came to the same basic point that when we spend a good bit of time with people in any context, really, sometimes we adopt some of their characteristics, like speech patterns, catchphrases, and maybe even physical actions. In my context of being a music instructor, people will either be fully, partially, or not engaged at all. I've seen it all and everything in between. But in these two cases, it filled me with pride that my own self-made, honed methods of delivering pertinent musical information, interfacing with the students as people, and having their trust placed in me at that time, it really hit home with the essence of the lessons. They took what I said, listened to it, and I've repeated it enough times so that when you repeat yourself, people start to understand that there's maybe an important message tied to your words. I'd love to hear your own experience, either as an educator or a student. Those moments when the information was delivered just so perfectly framed, delivered at the right rate and flow, and eventually was assimilated. I'm sure you have experience you could share, so do it. Leave a comment and maybe send this link to a fellow educator. There's your pep talk. Go get to work. Yeah, I could have made those stories a little bit shorter, but I thought some background information on my relationship with those students was also pertinent. The relationships you build become more than just the person looking for information sitting across the room from the person that has the information. If you work towards building some kind of relationship where some sort of camaraderie can be shared about your own creative journey along the way, even if you're teaching something like welding or landscaping or flower arranging, somebody has come to you, placed their trust in you, and wants to learn from you. So you can build some camaraderie that way, and that goes so far.